Hey everybody, it's ShadowStar here for another review of classic Doctor Who. This week, it's the Aztecs. So, the Aztecs is quite an interesting story. For starters, it really feels like it's a good companion piece. Obviously we get a big focus on Barbara because she starts to explore. She gets to display her knowledge of the past, which is great because she's supposed to be a teacher. And then obviously we get into the whole Aztec society in Nepal and, the whole ritualistic sacrifices and, the way we delve into the way their religion works, where they believe sacrifices work. And I like the idea that, they point out the rain was going to come either way. And that is how, religion kind of worked back in that day, where, somebody would have better ways of understanding weather patterns, would claim to know when rain was going to come, and then present it as some sacrifice. Even though rain was going to come anyway, they just knew it, but they said, oh, this is why it happens, and nobody else questioned it. But now along comes Barbara, and they're all confused, because because then she's putting a stop to their barbaric ways. I like the fact that they don't just have it be all barbaric Aztecs, because, we do get the scene of the Doctor kind of walking around, seeing this kind of palace garden and talking to people, which is nice. But of course we do get the bit where Barbara says she wants to stop the sacrifices, which obviously the Doctor puts a stop to, but that's the interesting part. Obviously, this is one of the first classic stories that really delves into the idea of changing the past and companions having to deal with the brutal aspects of the past. Ian has to deal with it, Barbara has to deal with it, Susan not so much, but she still has to deal with it. And, the Doctor just says, we've got to go with it, we've just got to put up with it. And whenever I'm watching these classic stories, I always like to wonder, how would it be with a more modern Doctor? How would a modern Doctor be with, I have a feeling a modern Doctor wouldn't be so gung-ho about just letting a life die. But at the same time, they also wouldn't want to change the past. But I feel like that's the point. Barbara says she wants to stop sacrifices the entire time. I feel like a modern Doctor would do that thing where they're like, well, we'll stop this one sacrifice, but they try and paint a point of saying, once we leave, we can't stop all the sacrifices and they'll just go back to their wicked ways. I feel like that's how it would go if it were a modern story, rather than Barbara trying to say, well, we can stop it forever, which you can't. You have to leave eventually. What are you planning on staying here forever, Barbara? And then, so obviously that's the biggest highlight of this first part of the story so far. Other parts is just Ian looks ridiculous in his costume, and oh boy, do we have to deal with these very slow classic Who fights where they just kind of whack their swords in the most slow choreographed sword fight there ever has been. But whatever. And, as it always goes in these classic stories, you're welcomed into a world, you've got some people who are kind of accepting, and there's always one asshole who's not accepting. That's pretty much the pattern of classic Who. Sometimes, that's one thing I liked about the Keys of Marinus is I felt it didn't fall into that pattern, whereas here, this one's starting to fall in that pattern. But because it's a classic story in the First Doctor's era, there's nothing sci-fi about it. It's just, we're in the past, let's see what happens. And I don't really know the plot line of this story. I know all this sacrifices, Barbara wants to stop it, but I don't know the plot line. So as we go through the rest of these next three parts, it'll be interesting to see. So I don't know what happens to it. I knew what happened in Keys Marinus. I don't know how it ends and what's going to happen. Like, I assume they'll get suspicious of Barbara. I mean, that guy's already suspicious, but I don't know. I don't remember their names, but yeah. Whatever. Anyway, on to part two. So, part two, and I am thoroughly enjoying the Aztecs so far. I feel like it's actually moving at a decent pace. Like I said, classic stories should remain 4 parts and no more, and so far this is proving a decent pace by classic standards. The fight dragged on a tiny bit, but I actually enjoyed it. Each character's got their own little story. So far, Susan's just been kind of pushed off to the side, not doing much, although she did get this little bit about how she might have to deal with, how this culture has arranged marriages and how she just has to deal with it, and she stands up to that idea, obviously. So that was a nice little scene, but, Susan's kind of been pushed to the side. They really can't figure out what to do with Susan in these episodes. It's like, for being the Doctor's granddaughter, she should really be doing a bit more, but oh well. But at least she's showing herself to be an intelligent person and studying. Obviously, this episode focuses a lot on Ian too. I loved at the start when he was practicing to fight and so on, and I love the way he's kind of confident and in control. Like, he really took to this culture well, and he puts on a bit of a voice to try and blend in, and the way he's a bit cocky and the way he says, oh, he doesn't need an actual weapon and he doesn't need to kill people, he can just kind of disarm them and so on. But then we get this cool little plot twist where it turns out the person the Doctor wants to get the maps to the tomb from so they can go home is the same person that Ian's fighting. But he didn't realise that at first, so the Doctor tries to help him by giving him some poison. Then it turns out he's actually fighting Ian. Then the Doctor tries to stop it, but he can't. The fight goes on for some time. Then Barbara says so, but obviously that one dude doubts him. But the other guy, that Ortok, actually does try to reasonably listen, especially since, he asked for a prophecy on what would happen if sacrifices continued, and she kind of, obviously, since she knows the history, she just says what's going to happen to their society, so her prophecies seem realistic to them, so yeah. But like I said, all through, and then obviously it ends once again with the fight being stopped, and I don't know, it's an interesting halfway point. Like I said, I'm actually enjoying all the characters in this story. The Doctor had some nice little scenes with in the garden. Susan, alright, Susan got pushed aside. She needs to do more. Maybe they'll give her something, but I have a feeling this isn't Susan's story, but that's okay. It's definitely Barbara's. I definitely enjoyed that scene at the beginning of this second part when the Doctor and Barbara are talking after they've stopped the sacrifice, and the Doctor's really scolding her for stopping the sacrifice and trying to completely change history. So, it's interesting to see how they're going to find a compromise throughout these next two episodes, because obviously classic stories, especially these early ones, don't always like to have a big build-up. Sometimes it's just, we escape, let's go home and leave things the way they are. Which for a story like this kind of actually makes sense. It's almost like Pompeii, where you can't actually stop anything, you just kind of have to get out of there. But yeah, I'm enjoying these parts. Barbara and Ian both are playing themselves really well. I'm enjoying Ian's acting throughout these episodes, so that's nice. But anyway, that's halfway through the story, and yeah, I'm enjoying it. Let's move on to part 3. I will say, part 3 in these stories seems to always be a slower pace. But there were still quite a few good scenes in this story, in this part of the story. First off, we get the part where we get the Doctor talking with Utoxel, and it's not really a confrontation per se, but I like that the Doctor really just doesn't give a shit about him. Like, you can tell the Doctor just doesn't care, but then obviously we get this slightly comedic scene later where the Doctor accidentally gets proposed to Kamika for some reason. Speaking of proposal, Susan turns down a proposal. Well, she turns down an arranged marriage, and, we really see that, Susan's back's against the wall when she's turning down a proposal and thinks all these punishments are completely barbaric, which completely makes sense given where Susan's from. But yeah, and obviously then we get stuff with Ian we get stuff with Barbara because they try to poison her, and she does the age-old trick of, well, if it's just a drink, you drink it first. And obviously then they get mad, and then they find out she's a false god. But I like the fact that even when she's found out, she still manages to try and get the upper hand and say that no one will believe him. So she still hasn't been completely disproven, and now But I do like that scene where Ian and Barbara were talking about how most people here are more on Utoxel's side, and it's just Ortok who's really the one that's been listening to her, which, gets Barbara to see that she can't really change the whole world in just a couple days, which I suppose is the point of the story. You can save a few things, but you can't truly change the course of history, which I like how they're trying to, reach that compromise of, like, she saved a few things. Well, actually, she saved no one, because that guy she tried to save killed himself anyway, and then she saved Ian, but that's just Ian, so, it'll be interesting, because now there's supposed to be one more sacrifice at a lunar eclipse, and again, as Barbara says, it's just a lunar eclipse. The sun isn't going anywhere, but obviously they don't know any better, and they're going to present it as such. And then obviously they find what appears to be a secret entrance to the tomb, but apparently it's also a water canal that is now going to flood, and now it looks like Ian's going to flood, so I don't know. Ian's in danger. Susan's going to be punished. Oh yeah, Susan's going to be punished because she dared to defy the idea of an arranged marriage, and I don't know, Toxel still thinks he can expose Barbara, so it's all going to come down to the final. Like, obviously, the stage is set for our final part, so it'll be interesting to see how they're all going to kind of get away from it all, run away to the TARDIS. But again, like I said, I've really enjoyed this story in the fact that, it's a story where we don't have a villain, per se. I mean, yes, your Toxel is a villain, but it's not a villain that's trying to destroy things. They're just people for all their time. And because of that, it's a focus. If you think about it from a modern perspective, this story is more just about Barbara and the companions learning that the past is tragic, but you can't really change the past, and sometimes you're going to be exposed to horrible things, no matter how much you want to change it. And, obviously, that's a trend which is carried on in modern Doctor Who stories, particularly. Actually, funny enough, these stories, that's one thing I'll always compliment Chris Chibnall on, is because, this story with, the companions realizing they can't change much, and they've got to accept that this time period has got some really tragic moments they've just got to just grit their teeth through. It definitely does feel like Demons to the Punjab or Rosa, where they've just kind of got to let history play out no matter how unfortunate it is. So it's very much a case of that, which, again, it's always a good story when you get a companion to have to learn that we can't change the past and we just kind of have to accept it. I love when time travel stories do that. I love when Doctor Who or Legends of Tomorrow does that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they get all out of it. So, we've got our cliffhanger with Ian and Susan. The stage is all set. The Doctor's with Ixter, and I don't know, he's trying to play innocent, but I don't know. I like that the Doctor really isn't taking shit from people either, and I like the little banter back and forth between Ian and the Doctor about the marriage proposal. That does feel like the fact that the Doctor stumbles upon it, but also kind of just takes it in stride and doesn't care because he knows he's leaving. That does feel like something you could see happening in, say, the modern series. So, it's fun to sort of make these comparisons and see what works and what wouldn't really carry over to the later episodes of later classic stories or modern series and so on. So, yeah. Anyway, let's find out how this story ends, alright? Okay, so one thing I'll notice about Part 4 is it seems to start repeating events from the Keys of Marinus. First, Susan's in distress again. I mean, 2 stories in a row and she's kidnapped and in distress and we gotta save her. That's twice in a row! She always gonna be in distress? Oh well. And also, someone tries to frame Ian by putting a weapon in somebody's hand and knocking somebody out on the back of their head. Stop repeating things from the Keys of Marinus. But it turns out Kamika was a real hero because she helps save Susan in the end, and, she makes a farewell to the Doctor. Ian finds the TARDIS, then they put some rope so they can all escape through the big giant door in the first place, which is nice. I do like the fact that even though they had time to get out the door, Ian still takes time to fight Ixter. It's like, you know what? He just wants revenge at this point. Ixter's tried to kill him 2 or 3 times, so Ian's like, fuck it, I'm throwing you off the building, bye. So yeah, that bit where Ian lifts off his helmet, I swear he was going to have some quirky remark, but no. But still, that was a nice little ending to their whole little rivalry they had going, and, and then obviously Barbara has this closing moment with the Doctor where she realizes, okay, she couldn't stop all sacrifices, but Ortok, the one reasonable person, has decided to just leave their civilization and maybe find a better life. So, it's that whole philosophy of, well, you can't change the history, but you saved one man. And, again, it's just like Fires of Pompeii. So, again, I like it. I like that we've got these similarities to modern episodes, which obviously is the reverse situation of, we're seeing the first time we've had this story. Because let's be real, lots of elements of different stories have repeated themselves. But, this is the first time it's been done. And that's what I like. A proper historical where we just had to say, right, to pass this shit, but we can focus on some small positives and just get on out of here. Which I love. That's what historicals excel at, and that's what this story excelled at. Obviously, for being a classic story, I think it didn't drag on too much at all. There was a lot of back and forth on trying to kill them, but okay, it did seem like Yatoxel kept trying and trying and trying to expose her, and eventually once she's exposed, she just kind of says, well, let's just get out of here. But that's often the way with these classic stories is, we're not trying to stop someone, we're just trying to get out of here. Especially in classics, especially in historicals. Historicals don't truly have sci-fi villains. They just kind of have someone who's kind of a villain for that time, but even then, he's just kind of a person of his time. Like, he's not a villain. He's not trying to change anything. If anything, the villainous fact is the fact. If anything, the villain is the fact that we can't change things. But I suppose that's the way it is. But like I said, I think I enjoyed this. Did I enjoy it more than Keys of Marinus? That's a tough call. On one hand, I think this one has got better pacing, obviously, and I think it has better character moments for Ian and Barbara especially. Barbara's got a lot to do in this episode. Ian has some fun moments. The Doctor had a few quirky moments. Susan mostly was pushed off to the side and in distress, so obviously Susan was the weak point of this story. But, I say, this focuses way more on characters, whereas I felt like the only quality of Keys of Marinus was the court scenes, whereas this felt like more of a actual enjoyable character story, which, since classic Who can't excel in certain other departments, let's make sure the characters are great. And I like when Barbara's firm too, because you got to remember she's a teacher, so she's just being firm with what she knows how to do. So yeah, I actually quite enjoyed the Keys. I actually quite enjoyed the Aztecs, and I've enjoyed the story. So it was a nice, good, well-paced classic Who story for the first Doctor's era. So, like I said, I'm not watching all of them. The next one I'll actually be doing is the Space Museum. I might one day come back and do some of the Season 1 stories if they ever put it on Blu-ray. But for now, the next one I'll be doing is the Space Museum. Anyway, I will see you next week for more Doctor Who reviews and other things as well. See you next time, guys.